Wait, this isn't Phantasy Star. Well, you're right, it isn't. If you're new here, I'll give a brief introduction. My name's Zeo, and I primarily cover lore content for a game called Phantasy Star Online 2. Many of us in the PSO2 community are also huge Final Fantasy fans. For many of us, it was the franchise that kindled our love for the RPG genre. If it wasn't for Final Fantasy, many of us may not have discovered Phantasy Star. The main focus of this channel from its inception has always been RPGs. We'll be discussing the backgrounds and influences of the many iconic jobs throughout the Final Fantasy franchise. We'll be limiting our scope to the mainline numbered series, so no spin-offs or sequels here. To start things off, we'll take a look at the warrior, or the fighter as it's sometimes known. Warriors share a number of common traits throughout the series, from their sturdy constitutions to their access to various weapons and armor. They're known for their strong melee damage and survivability. Warriors made their debut in the very first Final Fantasy. In the original North American version, they were called fighters. The Japanese word for warrior is Senshi, which also means soldier or combatant, or in this case, fighter. The warrior is one of the 6 basic jobs available at the start of the game. At the start of the game, you form a team of 4 heroes dubbed the Light Warriors. Their main task was to slay the 4 elemental fiends and restore light to their respective crystals. A warrior was a staple for many a party composition for their exceptional strength and survivability. One main drawback is that they're very gear dependent. Later in the game, warriors can become knights, which affords them access to some of the best gear in the game. They also have a little bit of white magic in their repertoire. The job system would make a return in Final Fantasy III, and the warrior would be among the first jobs made available. The jobs in FF3 were made available via the elemental crystals that were encountered throughout the adventure. Just like in the first game, they have high physical stats, but no special abilities and no magic. In the 3D remakes, they gain access to the Advanced command, which boosts their attack power but lowers their defense. In Final Fantasy IX, the closest equivalent character would be Adalbert Steiner. Steiner can wear heavy armor and also sports the highest HP and strength in the game. The job system in the mainline series wouldn't return until Final Fantasy XI, where the warrior would return as one of the 6 starter jobs. Just like their predecessors, the warriors of Vana'diel are a sturdy and versatile lot. They have decent aptitude with a number of weapons, but really shine with a great axe in their hands. Their access to heavy armor and their ability to grab their enemies' attention made them sought after as tanks early on. The tank role would take a backseat at endgame though. Warriors have access to skills that bolster their accuracy, attack power, and critical hit rate, and are capable of dishing out obscene amounts of damage with the right support. Warriors have always remained one of the strongest melee jobs in the game, but just like its predecessors, it's also incredibly gear dependent. With this being an MMO, a newcomer might have a hard time finding groups for certain encounters. They're also vying for party spots with their more established and better equipped counterparts. The warrior's artifact armor once belonged to a Galka warrior by the name of Raugrim, who was also their tailkeeper. Whenever a Galka dies, they reincarnate sometime later with no memory of their previous life. The Tailkeeper, on the other hand, comes back not just with the memories of his own past life, but those of every other Galka over the past 200 years. Sounds pretty cool, right? Well, not really, especially when you consider their tragic history. The Galka once lived in the Altepa Desert before being invaded by the Antikins, which were large humanoid ant-like creatures. The surviving Galka were scattered throughout Vana'diel, with many of them settling in Bastuk. Their massive appearance and physical strength made them the ideal workhorses for the Humes in the Republic of Bastuk. The Galka were put to work in the mines, allowing Bastuk to flourish as a technological leader throughout Vana'diel. The Tailkeeper is the spiritual leader of the Galka, but with a heavy cost: the painful memories of generations past. Now we come to its most recent mainline iteration in Final Fantasy XIV. Aspiring warriors begin as marauders upon taking their first steps in Eorzea. The Marauders were born from the days of ship-to-ship battles on the high seas. The Great Axe was a weapon of choice for pirates, both for combat and ship maintenance. Once a Marauder gains enough experience, they can become a warrior. Unlike in previous entries, the warriors of Eorzea forego their use of multiple weapons, instead focusing on one, the imposing two-handed axe. Warriors defend their allies with their mighty axes and unbridled ferocity. They're also known for their ability to put out high amounts of burst damage for a tank job. The warriors of Eorzea got their roots from an ancient tribe on the northernmost edge of Abalathia's spine. These fearsome mercenaries mastered the Great Axe and their inner beasts, converting that energy into raw, unbridled savagery on the battlefield. Controlling this inner beast is also part of a warrior's training. This uncontrolled rage can have dire consequences not just for the warrior but those around them. The warriors were at the forefront of Eorzea's countless battles, but as peace set in, their ways gradually faded into obscurity. A mercenary by the name of Curious Gorge seeks to master the long-lost arts of his ancestors and preserve this knowledge by passing it on to someone else. He travels to Lenosha to fulfill this task by joining a mercenary group called the Company of Heroes. He would eventually find a worthy disciple in a warrior of light who would choose to walk this path. Since their inception, Japanese RPGs have borrowed heavily from Western RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons. Final Fantasy, of course, was no exception to this. The warriors of Final Fantasy were quite similar to their D&D counterpart, the fighter, even sharing names at one point. They tended to wear heavy armor and wield a variety of weapons in addition to their exceptional physical attributes. No matter the incarnation, a warrior's best friends are always their weapon of choice and their love for the fight. Before you get on with the rest of your day, I'd like to ask you to do the usual YouTubey stuff that helps get this out in front of more people. And of course, share this with your ex-crazy friends. After all, sharing is caring, right? As always, thank you so much for watching and for the continued support. And remember, to thine own self be true. Until next time, farewell.